The rain was coming down in sheets that Thursday evening, rattling against the windows of my small apartment in Portland, Oregon. I had just come home from one of the hardest days at work I'd ever had. The company I'd been with for almost 3 years had announced massive layoffs, and though I was still employed, the anxiety and uncertainty hung over me like a cloud I couldn't shake. I tossed my soaked umbrella in the corner and kicked off my shoes. My apartment felt colder than usual, though maybe it was just my mood. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sank into the couch, trying to lose myself in an old TV show. But the quiet between the lines of dialogue reminded me of how alone I felt. That's when I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't loud, more of a hesitant tap, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure whether they should even be there. I wasn't expecting anyone, so for a moment I froze. When I opened the door, there he was, Ethan Miller, my neighbor from 2 floors down. We'd exchanged polite hellos in the hallway before, but I wouldn't say we were friends. He was holding a grocery bag in one hand and had a sheepish smile on his face. "Hey, sorry to bother you," he began, pushing wet hair out of his eyes. "But I made way too much chicken soup tonight, and I thought maybe you'd like some?" I blinked at him, unsure how to respond. "You brought me soup?" "Yeah," he said, chuckling awkwardly. "You always seem so busy, and I thought it might be nice. Plus, I hate wasting food." I stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. The smell of homemade chicken soup filled my apartment as he set the bag down on the counter. "I appreciate this," I said. "It's been a rough day." He glanced at me, concern flickering in his eyes. "Do you want to talk about it?" I hesitated. Normally, I kept my problems to myself, but something about Ethan's presence felt disarming. Maybe it was the way he listened without interrupting, or maybe it was the fact that he'd shown up uninvited but welcome. So I told him. I told him about the layoffs, the uncertainty, the feeling that I was barely keeping my head above water. He didn't try to offer quick fixes or empty reassurance. He just sat there, nodding, occasionally asking a gentle question. By the time we finished eating, the tension in my chest had eased. Ethan stood to leave, but before he walked out, he said, "Hey, if you ever need anything at all, you can knock on my door, okay?" Over the next few weeks, Ethan and I started to run into each other more often, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes not. He'd invite me down for coffee, or I'd bring over a batch of cookies I'd baked. I learned that he was a freelance graphic designer who loved hiking and had a habit of doodling on napkins whenever he was deep in thought. One Saturday, he invited me to join him for a hike in Forest Park. I almost said no. The thought of spending a whole day with him felt different, in a way I wasn't ready to name. But something in his warm smile convinced me. The trail was muddy from recent rain, and we ended up laughing more than once at our clumsy attempts to avoid puddles. At one point, we stopped at a scenic overlook, the city spread out beneath us. The air was crisp, and the sky was beginning to clear. "It's beautiful," I said, taking in the view. "Yeah," he replied, but when I glanced at him, I realized he wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at me. I looked away quickly, my cheeks warming. We didn't say anything for a while after that, but the moment lingered. As the months passed, our friendship deepened. He was there when my car broke down, showing up with jumper cables and a patient smile. I was there when one of his design clients backed out last minute, bringing him pizza and listening while he vented. One chilly December evening, just before Christmas, there was another knock on my door. When I opened it, Ethan was standing there holding a small, neatly wrapped box. "Merry Christmas," he said. Inside was a framed print of one of his drawings, a little scene of my apartment building, snow falling softly around it. In one of the windows, he'd drawn a tiny figure wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the night. "That's me?" I asked, smiling. "Yeah," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought you might like it." I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged him. And for the first time, he hugged me back without that careful distance we'd kept for so long. From that night on, things shifted between us. We didn't rush anything. There was no grand confession or dramatic moment. Just a quiet understanding that we'd become part of each other's lives in a way neither of us had expected. Ethan had knocked on my door when I needed it most, but somewhere along the way, He'd also opened a door in my heart, and I was so glad I'd let him in.